Welcome back inside the mind of Andrew Joseph Stack, the man feds say flew his plane into an office building in Austin today, citing frustrations with the government. An internet manifesto officials now say was left behind by Stack. The pilot denounces the federal government, specifically citing a history of troubles with the IRS. It's addressed to Mr. Big Brother, IRS man. The building Stack chose to slam into housed the Austin offices of the IRS. Here's a quote that comes near the end of the web posting, dated today. And again, I quote, "I know there have been countless before me, and there are sure to be as many after. I can only hope that the numbers quickly get too big to be whitewashed and ignored, that the American zombies wake up and revolt." Still, the White House and law enforcement authorities say this does not appear, in their view, to be terrorism. The Austin Fire Department, quote, categorically denied that fear this afternoon. Now, for your own benefit, here's how the Department of Defense in this country defines terrorism. And again, this is another quote: "The calculated use of unlawful violence or threat of unlawful violence to inculcate fear intended to coerce or to intimidate governments or societies in the pursuit of goals that are generally political, religious, or ideological." So what do you think? Is it terror, anti-government anger gone too far, or something else? Joining us now, Devlin Barrett, an AP reporter covering the Justice Department and former FBI profiler, NBC analyst Clint Van Zandt with us on the phone. Clint, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I read that definition and I look at this man's decisions, and obviously I'm no expert, but this certainly looks like the definition of domestic terror.
Well, I think if you go by the strict definition, it does. I think the challenge right now for the authorities, as you and I discussed before, is to find out if there was anyone else involved or not. In essence, was there a conspiracy? We know, for example, with Timothy McVeigh, that was labeled an act of domestic terrorism. And, of course, at least one other individual was convicted with him, and some believe, others may have had knowledge, too. So you had that conspiratorial type of aspect. In this, everything that you've reported and Pete Williams and others have reported suggests that this was one angry, challenged, demented, frustrated, angry person who was mad, and he just wasn't going to take it anymore. And this was the way, I think, Dylan, this was the way he felt he was finally going to make his case and get someone to pay attention. And, of course, the shame of it all is, number one, he had to take his own life, and number two, he tried to take so many others with him.
Yeah, no, it's the worst possible solution to whatever frustration anybody may be experiencing. Devlin, the reason I guess I push this question is the following. If it's treated as a crime by a crazy man, it in some ways relieves the government of the responsibility of trying to figure out whether there are more self-starters, people who are angry with the government or anything else, who could exhibit this type of behavior. If you acknowledge that this is potentially an act of terror in the clinical definition of it, it forces you to acknowledge the potential threat from other angry self-starters. How does the government even begin, whether it's somebody like this or you go to Fort Hood in a different instance, when you have an individual who becomes angry? And Fort Hood is different in many ways because I know there are so many flags that have been revealed to us subsequently. But the angry self-starter, for whatever reason, seems to be a very difficult thing to deal with. How does the Justice Department or the government in general even begin to try to defend itself from that?
Yeah, Dylan, a lot of times what FBI officials will say is they worry a great deal about what they tend to refer to as the lone wolf type suspect. And it may be that this is one of those scenarios. One of the things they have to check out, like Clint said, is was anyone helping him? Was anyone in any way involved or aware of what he planned to do? I don't think there's a clear answer to that question yet, but I do think that for all practical purposes, you could say it appears at this point that he tried to do with the plane what Timothy McVeigh tried to do with a truck.
Yeah. Clint, how does the government deal with this? In other words, when you look at the polling data, right? You know people are angry. You see the you see all these things. I'm not suggesting it's a huge leap between being angry at what you see as a dysfunctional or broken system and moving to this level of violence against yourself and other innocent victims in our society. The government, however, how do they deal with it?
Well, you know, we all realize that this country has dealt with tax protesters since it started, since the Boston Tea Party, where we were throwing tea over the side of the boats in Boston Harbor. And then, you know, in the last decade, we dealt with the Montana Freemen and other groups. There have always been tax protest groups out there who have felt that either the tax code itself, just the act of taxation, was unjust, or the tax code was written to, as Mr. Stack said in his manifesto, to benefit the very rich and to leave you and I and everybody else kind of left in the wayside. I think the bigger issue for the government right now, again, is, you know, does he represent an ongoing movement? And as Stack tends to suggest but doesn't support, are there other individuals whose anger may rise to the level that his does, where they would act out in a similar manner? Is he a domestic terrorist? I don't think so. By definition, he may be. My gut says he's not. My gut says, as we just discussed, that he's a lone wolf, but that lone wolf is probably expressing the same feelings, maybe the same howls that many Americans would like to make at the same time.
You agree with that, Devlin?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, when you talk about lone wolves, when you talk about the tax issue, that's an even more difficult type of scenario to suss out the actual violent perpetrator. Because if you think about it, if you ask anyone on the street, you know, what do you think of the IRS? There's going to be a fair bit of negative in that. And there's lots of people who write very angry things about the IRS online. So
or the bank bailout, or health care. I mean, everything he talked about is something that half the people in this country, if not more, would offer their own criticism of. Luckily for all of us, very few will get in a plane and fly it into a building as a result.
Right, and the challenge for investigators is always, of that large group of people who are angry, how do you find the needle in the haystack that's willing to act on that anger? And that is, they will admit, a very difficult thing to do.
Can they even do it? I mean, are we kidding ourselves? I know I got to wrap this up, Clint, but are we delusional because we are by our nature optimistic? But is there any system that can the Israeli guy, can any government in the world identify an angry lone wolf and tell the difference between somebody who's angry and somebody who's willing to do this?
And the answer is many times we can't. We try to measure, we try to assess threat based upon what the individual writes. You know, Psych 101 tells us the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. But you look at somebody like this who had been the CEO of 2 software companies. He lost them. He's been through a couple of bad marriages. He's been through many financial challenges. Hey, you know, you're probably talking about 25% of America right there.
Exactly. So listen, thank you both for the conversation. Devlin, thanks for the time. Clint, thanks for sticking with us for a second conversation.